Good afternoon, everybody. It's about a little past 11 a.m. here on the United States East Coast up here in Maine, and just a short video I'm recording. Usually I do everything live, but this I'm not. I wanted to talk about prisms for a minute, and there's a really important thing that I think a lot of people miss, and that the best way to accomplish something more often than not is to do it in service of something else. I'll give you an example. Back when Trump was in office, they were fighting over ANWR a whole lot. And ANWR is the Arctic National Wildlife Refuge, right? And it was being argued about, like, is it a good idea to do this? Is it a bad idea to do this? Millions, tens of millions fought over this by oil companies, activists, whatnot. And then it ended up being a throw-on to a tax bill, where it basically was an add-on. No one even knew it was there because no one was looking until the whole thing was done. And once it was done, the issue having been solved and everyone understanding that everyone had moved on, it didn't become an issue anymore. And why do I say that in respect to prisms? A lot of times when things happen that don't make sense, it's because there are massive collateral changes that happen in response to things that are serving some other purpose, an economic interest is served, so politics makes no sense. Or a war happens because you need to defend the currency, right? And we could pick any number of things. And one of the things that happens, and it is true, is that wars will happen to hide evidence. There's an argument that goes that Kennedy was assassinated because LBJ united everyone who needed to work together with the understanding that he was going to be the fall guy. So it's not that there aren't these latent forces waiting to be acted upon, but there's always an individual who's the organizer. There's always a personal motive, and whether it's theft or covering up theft, that's a thing. And a lot of activists who mean well and have good intentions but are naive always say, we need to have a system where we have no corruption and people come out or they don't get paid or any of these things. And it sounds good, but fundamentally it doesn't work. If you tell someone in government they're not going to get paid, someone else is going to pay them, and that's your theft. The most effective systems historically often have been systems like monarchy, where in fact you want your monarch to be a bit of a thief, but a thief where the benefit accrues to the people. And it's a cynical observation, but it's a true observation that oftentimes the problem we have is not that our elites are deceptive and awful people it's a problem theologically, of course, and in the bigger scheme of things, but in our day-to-day living, the problem is that they're robbing us to benefit, and that they're working together as a den of thieves against the people. Whereas if you had a politician who was a thief for you, and I think that's why a lot of people like Trump, they perceived him as, he's a scumbag, but we need a scumbag to fight the scumbags. And of course, in the end, it doesn't work. But in the medium term, it helps explain why many things happen that don't make sense to people. And that's why what I wanted to say today in this little short is, if something doesn't make sense for you, look at it through another prism. If it doesn't make sense politically, look at it economically. Look at it technologically. Look at what the interests are of people out there. And I will tell you, you will learn more about history if you understand this one thing than anything else. People lie about tactics, but they're surprisingly honest about their intentions. People talk about what they really want. What they will never tell you is how they want to get there. And the reason they do this is a simple psychological quirk. Most people think they're good, and they justify what they're doing to others and for themselves in the logic, the ends justify the means, that they're doing it for the right reason, and that therefore whatever they do is ultimately justified. And so when you see people, setting us up for terrible wars, all sorts of things, and especially when you deal with the transhumanists, that's why we talk about them so much. They want a world where they can cheat death. So for them, they're literally fighting for their eternal lives. And of course, it's rocks in a machine, but nonetheless, they're doing so. And that is why they're willing to do anything and everything to break apart the society. And when you understand that they are ultimately the psychological religious influence that we are dealing with, you begin to look at things differently. And then you say, oh, well, that's why they're willing to break everything, because it won't matter what political system you have. If you have theoretically an infinite amount of time, and if you're part machine, you have no resource allocation that's needed other than a little bit of electricity, you can afford to break the world. Hell, you can afford to have climate change suck out carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere, kill all the plants, and sit there as a robot contemplating what you've done. with the highest level of remove and sociopathy. And most people are like, oh, you're crazy, Tom. Am I? I mean, what do people do to prevent death? What do people do to live eternally? What do people do? I mean, what really motivates people? What are our core fears? And if you can start thinking like that, you might just have a chance of understanding what the hell is actually happening out there. But I know a lot of people don't do that. I know that this is not the way we're taught to think. We're taught to think that there's a system, there must always be a system, and the right system will lead to the right outcome. The problem is not the systems, the problem is the people. It always is in the groupings we make. And if you want to be part of the solution, you really have to learn to think this way and look at, and if something doesn't make sense to you, it's real simple. You just keep asking, what am I not seeing? What is the motive? What do they gain? And sometimes destroying an enemy is a gain. Sometimes removing an obstacle is a gain, and people aren't ready for those things. But I think if you look at it that way, you'll understand much better. Because when we look at what's happening with Russia, for instance, just as an example, why would the U.S. pick a war like this? Because the elites have lost control of their own countries. You can see that in the anger in the streets in Ottawa, which is going to be reflected much more later this week here in America. When everyone's waving those flags and that convoy goes on by and people start going on to it, it's the next big thing. And in Washington, they'll be like, no, we're not going to let this happen in all the cities. And no one wants to do separation because no one knows how to, because nobody knows what they want. They just know, screw that guy, we don't want him. Okay, that's fine. That's why you got to go live apart and, all the things we talk about on this channel in Pineland. But what I want to say is that if you begin to see that, you can begin to see why blowing up the world is not a big thing to these people, especially if they've insulated themselves well enough. And, it's one of those things. Everyone gets to hide in a bunker who's responsible for the crap. And the real people, they just go along, which is why I always tell people, you may not like the game. You want to be aware of the game. And if you just want to devote your life, unless you're devoting your life to Jesus and theology and sitting there, in which case, God bless you, you're a better person than I am, you better be aware of what's happening around you. Because if you care about people, and presumably do, you have loved ones or friends, or at least theoretically think everyone should be blown up if you're that much of a misanthrope, you might want to start that outreach, and you might want to do it by being aware of what's happening around you, because things could happen quick. Don't panic, just be aware, and that is my advice to you today. So just pray the Lord watches over all of us these days, because I'm watching this. Things in Syria are related to what's happening between the Russians and the Americans, and the bits and pieces of world tearing itself into new conflict are self-evident. But for the time being, there isn't much we can do about that other than to help one another. I don't think there's a lot of time, but then I'm paranoid. I never think there's a lot of time. What I do know is whatever comes, we can only shape our part in how we survive and go past it to a certain extent, and that's a sane thing to worry about. So hopefully this had some value to you, just a little message to you, something I was thinking about because of a conversation I saw where someone just wasn't making sense, and I thought maybe someone would have some value for this. So God bless you guys, have a good day, and I'll talk to you soon. Bye-bye.